All right. So books, they're a quintessential part of learning in everyday society. Used from anything from informing to persuading to general enjoyment. People read books for all sorts of purposes. But in schools in particular, books are used for learning and the development of children and our youth. Specifically, I'll be tackling the subject of banning or restricting literature in the form of books or passages or poetry in the school systems, and whether or not is a ethical or a needed precaution in certain circumstances. To start, I would like to give my opinion. No, you do not need to ban any form of literature in schools. Now, that is not to say we should not restrict certain levels of reading to certain children. We don't want to be putting college level material in the hands of kindergartners. We don't want to overwhelm them or give them a false sense of where they need to be at a certain point. Obviously, we want to gradually increase their reading comprehension, but when they get of age or of ability to read such books that would be considered controversial, such as Huckleberry Finn, I do not feel it is in the benefit of the child or children to ban or restrict said book. Now, some will argue that in these books there are terms, topics, words that are used that can be negatively impacting their children or their students. And while I can understand that certain phrases or words, such as in Huckleberry Finn as mentioned, they use a particular derogatory term to denote a certain race of people. And while this is incredibly negative and derogatory, as I said, it is important that children have the capacity or have the ability or the opportunity to expose themselves to such information. It is, I feel it is much more of a hindrance, it's much more of a negative, there's a much larger negative outcome when you restrict somebody's information and viewpoint, because then they leave with less information and have a higher chance of becoming ignorant to important information. Despite the derogatory nature and the controversial nature of some literature, the information is still valid and still important for children to know. And when I say children, I mean anyone going through our public system or private schooling. It is anybody that is not an adult, below the age of 18. I think it is imperative that they have access to all types of literature, all subjects, all opinions that people hold, because by giving individuals access to a broad spectrum of opinions and scopes and outlooks on life, you give them more of an opportunity to formulate their own opinion. You don't bottleneck them into pre-established viewpoints that they don't actually understand. You allow them to develop and choose what they agree with and what they don't. And when you allow individuals and youth and students to learn and engross themselves into uncomfortable or what would be seemingly uncomfortable topics, you allow them to grow as a person. They become more of like an adult. They can understand why it is potentially controversial, why it is a derogatory term, why things should and should not be used in everyday society, instead of restricting that from them and then having to learn it the hard way or never learning it at all, which can lead them into traps later in life where they fall into pits of ignorance that they can't escape from anymore. These all can be avoided with simple access. And I'm not proclaiming that every controversial or potentially bannable book or piece of literature should be forced upon students. I think it should be a choice. I don't think it should be required in every English class across America, across the world. But I do think if a student desires, it should be accessible via either a library or other archive provided to them via the education they're acquiring. As I talk to you today, I continue to reiterate the importance of literature, and specifically literature that makes individuals question their beliefs and what is important in life. And those topics can be difficult for people to handle at times, adults to handle. And it can be hard to allow yourself to subjugate children or give children access to such information when it's difficult for even you to fathom or read such information, such topics, which is entirely understandable. But you also have to understand that it is imperative, as I've stated, that children have that opportunity. They need to be able to grow through experience, through understanding of topics that may not be these safe childhood, like kindergarten, preschool topics. We want them to evolve as a person through schooling. We don't want them to stay stagnant over the years by only reading what is safe. We want them to evolve. So overall, I would like to say that my overall message is to accept and embrace literature as a whole. Don't restrict it for students or anybody. I think it should be fully embraced throughout schooling, throughout the world, and anybody should have access to any form of literature despite the insufferable or derogatory nature of it. I think it should all be accessible. Thank you for your time.